Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Bonfire. Today, we are going to be reading Chapter 4. So, we're going to be looking at the trip over the pond to England. Okay, so without further ado, let us begin. Right, Chapter 4. "You men!" bellowed Colonel Morrison. I nearly jumped out of my skin because he was sitting on King right beside me and the Major. "You there! Stop dithering around there and form up!" The Colonel huffed and turned to the Major. "It's like herding cats." "I swear! Captain Cosgrave, get those men and wagons in formation." Captain Cosgrave trotted his horse towards the rear, where there was a tangle of wagons, some crisscrossed. Some horses reared in harness, red-faced drivers tried to gain control of their teams. The Major, who turned me around to face the gathering soldiers, spoke to young Lex, who was near the front. "Lieutenant Helmer, go down and check on the guns. I don't want to hear of any damage. We can't afford it." "Yes, sir," said Lex smartly, and he rode off on a handsome bay thoroughbred gelding, with a crooked white blaze down his face and over one nostril. Lex was a nice boy, and I was relieved he had not gotten stuck with Thor. That cantankerous animal was now consigned to hauling guns and would never be anyone's mount again. The Major turned me to face forward again. We stood at the head of the artillery column and prepared to move out. The Major seemed excited and chuckled under his breath. As he puffed on his pipe and patted my neck, and the sweet tobacco smell swirled around my head. I liked the smell of it. The atmosphere was electric as men, horses, mules, field guns, wagons, in great numbers got organized and ready to march to Quebec City and the ship that would take us down the Great St. Lawrence River and eventually across the pond to England. The mood was entirely one of excitement. A great adventure was about to unfold. Horses are brilliant at detecting the emotional states of their riders. Some, whose names I will not mention, have even taken a ruthless advantage of a fearful rider. Not I, of course, but it's easy to do. On this day, I could sense some fear and anxiety, but overall, the feeling was of great anticipation. None of us knew how dramatically that positive expectation would be shattered in the months and years to come. On the quay in Quebec City, we horses looked at one another. There was no comfort or reassurance to be found. Not one of us had ever walked up a plank to an oddly shaped building that floated on the water. The only thing I could do was take my confidence from the Major, who, with Colonel Morrison, had done this exact thing 14 years earlier with horses and an artillery brigade, except the destination had been Johannesburg, South Africa. The Major was as calm as anything as he led me up the plank, followed by Dodge. King was behind us, being led by Colonel Morrison's men, but we were soon separated. Once we were below decks, King and I called to each other a couple of times, but he sounded really far away, perhaps the opposite side of the hold. So there I was in my tiny box stall at the bottom of a ship with 2 mules on one side and a cayuse from Alberta on the other. The mules were a matched pair, at least in color, dark bay and size-wise, and their handler, Jack Oliphant from Medicine Hat, seemed to have high regard for them. He fussed over at them at regular intervals. Magnus was beside me, and Monty, which I came to discover was short for Montague, was beside him. Such lofty names for such lowly beasts, I thought. Magnus was shorter than me, but what he lacked in stature, he made up for in attitude. He had this quiet, imperious way of looking down at me, which made me feel self-conscious, like a small colt again. Me? Bonfire? It was irritating, but inescapable. Monty, on the other hand, was a goofball. Plain and simple. Okay? Excuse me, my dog's throwing her toy around. That's what the banging is. Okay? And on his own, he would have been completely useless. But Magnus kept him in line, and Monty's strong point was that he was extremely powerful. I heard Jock tell another groom that on his own, Monty would only turn left. Someone had gotten him in the habit as a youngster of leaving the farm out the farm gate and turning left to town. Well, that was that. To get him to turn right ever after was a tremendous battle. A classic illustration of Mule's renowned stubborn, and I don't mind saying stupid streak. But the more sensible Magnus was along with him, Monty would do whatever he did. With frightful roaring engines and a shouting of men, our ship, Saxonia, lurched away from the quay in Quebec City and began the slow, swishing journey down the St. Lawrence River to the Atlantic Ocean. It was October 3rd, 1914. On board our ship were 632 horses and mules, the major, and the entire 1st Brigade Canadian Field Artillery, and all their men and equipment. The major insisted that Dodge check on my well-being as often as possible. The fact was, the major himself came down at least once a day, and quite often with treats for me, biscuits, apples, raspberries, and other delights. I would nicker a greeting as soon as I saw him, and a deep, throaty sort of equine purr, only shorter, which the major called a wicker. He would smile when he heard it. Bonfire, you've got the best wicker of any horse I've known. Young Lex Helmer came down too. After G checked on his own horse, he'd pay me a visit as well. I can't swear to it, but I think the inscrutable Magnus rolled his eyes at this. Well, it was one thing to fuss over mules, quite another to fuss over the Chestnut Gentleman. The cayuse to my right was a short, stout, black and white paint with a white face and 2 spooky-looking blue eyes. Ghost kept to himself, except when our meager 2 flakes of hay were delivered twice a day. He'd pin his ears back and make a show of challenging me for it, which was silly because we had our own manger. I learned to ignore him. We could hear the strains of a pipe band playing on the decks above as we glided downriver. Every now and again, cheers would erupt from the men above, and that would be answered by the throngs of onlookers lining the riverbanks. The Canadian anthem, the Maple Leaf Forever, was played and sung repeatedly with great gusto. It all seemed very celebratory. I wondered why the celebrations did not make me feel as happy as they should have. It soon became evident there was a short of handlers on the Saxonia, and poor Dodge had to take care of about a dozen of us. I resented having to share him with other horses, but there was no choice in the matter. He did his best to attend to me the way the major had instructed him, and apologized to me often for his long absences. He mucked us all out as well as he could, and I was afraid he was being overtaxed in the process. He would appear puffing and flushed and perspiring as he tried to stay ahead of the manure. Sorry, Master Bonfire. It's an awful situation. Too many horses and not enough men. What can I say? It's simply a bare fact of us horses. Eating hay creates manure. Drinking water creates urine. As time passed, the stench of sweat, manure, and the smell of ammonia from the urine became overpowering and made our eyes water. The major was as kind to me as ever on his visits, but as he came and went, I'd hear him grumble under his breath, "This is a disgrace," and "Good Lord, what a smell." The major was, well, it was a sorry situation for man and beast, and when we reached Gaspé Harbor, just as the soldiers had to form up before we all marched to Valcartier to Quebec City, the 33 ships of the Canadian Expeditionary Force had to form up before entering the massive Gulf of St. Lawrence. The ventilation below decks was non-existent. Add to that the autumn heat and the stillness, and we waited for all the ships to arrive. It was quite intolerable. In all, the 33 ships contained upwards of 8,000 horses. At some point while we wait, waited. A small, noisy launch came by, and a loud man aboard it hollered up to the men above decks. Soldiers, as you embark on this sacred quest, the eyes of Canada and indeed the world are upon you. You will be brave, and you will be victorious. You will be as fine a body of men as ever faced a foe. You are the pride of this great nation, and God is with you. I knew that voice. It was that puffed up minister, formerly the militia now, but now Minister of War Sam Hughes, that I had seen at Valcartier inspecting the chaplains. He seemed a windy character, and the most soldiers didn't take him seriously. Peals of laughter could be heard above as he launched his motor away. Finally, we began to move into the yawning Gulf of the St. Lawrence towards the Atlantic Ocean. Our ships formed up into 3 columns of 11, escorted by 6 British warships, one at the front and back of each column. The further out we traveled, the more welcome sea air came down below to us and blew the stuffiness out of our quarters. What a relief! Dodge appeared suddenly beside me. "We're off, Master Bonfire." He patted me vigorously on the withers. "Only 2,500 miles to go. I'll get to see me old England for the first time in a dozen years." 2,500 miles? Across water? Good grief! I must say, Bonfire, fox hunter extraordinaire, was bored beyond belief. Just standing in a tiny stall with no exercise, not even a walk. It was the most tedious experience of my life. We horses certainly can sleep on our feet, and often do. But how I missed a good lie down in the sun, or a roll in the dirt, or a gallop in a good buck. I sorely missed my stall at Dr. Todd's farm, a large, classy affair with brass fittings and luxurious piles of soft, clean yellow straw. There was even a brass plate above my stall with Bonfire engraved on it. Plus, I had to contend with Magnus the mule looking haughtily down his nose at me, like I was a novice and he knew things I didn't. And worse, it was probably true. I was a sporting horse amidst a herd of cavalry and workhorse. Oh, and let us not forget the mules. But nothing could dampen the legendary Bonfire appetite. Even as our ship gently rolled over the waves, food was the only thing I had to look forward to break the monotony. The cayuse on my left went right off his food. He just picked at a little without enthusiasm. Magnus and Monty seemed not to care one way or another about anything. Their handler was another matter. Even though I heard other handlers say we were being blessed with a smooth crossing, Jock threw up into a bucket regularly for the next 12 days that our crossing took. The poor fellow, already fair-skinned, was thin and white as the chalk sea cliffs by the time we approached the shores of England. Ladies and gentlemen, and that is the end of Chapter 4. So one thing that is interesting to notice is that, the Canadian anthem, Maple Leaf Forever, or as mentioned in the book, that was the old anthem. Our current anthem, O Canada, was written after World War I. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you enjoyed the story, and stay tuned for our next video, which will be Chapter 5. Have a good day, ladies and gentlemen.